How many times have you told yourself, this is the last time? Whether it's one more drink, one more episode, one more scroll, or one more bite, we often chase something that we know won't truly satisfy us. And yet, we return. Over and over again. But what if this isn't a sign of weakness, but a sign of something deeper? What if, as Dr. Gabor Maté says, compulsion isn't about pleasure or lack of willpower, it's about pain. Hidden pain. Unspoken pain. Pain we've carried for so long, we forgot it's there. And what if your compulsive behaviors aren't the real problem, but your attempt to escape a pain you've never learned how to hold? This isn't just about addiction. It's about the thousand subtle ways we numb ourselves, always staying busy, always pleasing others, always running. From what exactly? In this video, we're going to walk together into that quiet place where your pain lives, not to judge it, but to understand it. Because if you've reached midlife and you're still asking, why do I do this? Maybe you're finally ready to meet the answer, not with shame, but with truth. You might not remember the exact moment you started needing it. Whatever your it is, it could be sugar, or shopping, or gambling, or chaos in relationships, or the constant need to fix others. But the real beginning wasn't the behavior. It was the moment you learned that feeling your pain wasn't safe. Maybe you grew up in a house where no one talked about emotions. Maybe love was given only when you performed well. Maybe you were told in subtle or brutal ways that sadness, fear, anger were unacceptable. So your nervous system adapted. You became a survivor. You learned to bury the ache, smile through the silence, and function through the pain. But buried pain doesn't disappear. It transforms into restlessness, into obsession, into patterns that make no logical sense but offer temporary relief. And that's what a compulsion is, an urgent attempt to escape the unbearable. The scream of a wound that's been ignored for too long. Some people get loud, others shut down. Some chase highs, others cling to control. But beneath it all is the same truth. I'm hurting and I don't know how to say it. That truth deserves compassion, not condemnation. Because when pain goes silent, compulsion becomes its voice. Pause for a moment. What's the feeling you've been avoiding? The one that lives in the quiet space between your distractions. Is it loneliness, guilt, rage, the ache of not being enough? Most people don't wake up one day and decide to become compulsive. It begins with discomfort, a sense that something inside is too heavy, too raw, too overwhelming to face. So we reach for something, anything, to dull the edges. But here's the paradox. The more we try to avoid a feeling, the more it controls us. Repression isn't resolution. It's a temporary dam holding back a flood. And underneath most compulsions lies one haunting question. If I truly felt what's inside me, would I survive it? Gabor Maté often says, not all pain is equal, but all pain seeks relief. For many, the pain began early. As children, we might have experienced neglect, emotional absence, or unpredictability. Even if we can't name the trauma, our bodies remember. That's why compulsive behaviors don't respond to logic or self-discipline alone. Because they aren't logical problems. They're emotional survival strategies. We fear what we haven't learned to feel, and the deeper the fear, the stronger the impulse to escape it. But here's the truth. You cannot heal what you refuse to feel. Avoiding the emotion only keeps the compulsion alive. And sometimes simply naming what we've been avoiding, giving it space, breath, honesty, can begin to loosen its grip. So ask yourself gently, what is the feeling I run from the most? Don't answer quickly. Sit with it, feel it, let it speak, because the way out begins with letting it in. Not all wounds leave bruises. Some are quiet, subtle, hidden in plain sight. You might think, but I had a normal childhood. Nothing dramatic happened. And yet, something inside still aches, still hungers, still reaches for what it never fully received. Because trauma isn't just what happened to you. It's what didn't happen. The love that wasn't safe, the comfort that never came, the presence that was absent when you needed it most. This is what Gabor Maté calls the wound of disconnection. Children don't need perfect parents. They need attuned ones. Adults who see them, hear them, mirror their emotions, and make them feel safe to exist exactly as they are. But when that connection is missing, the child begins to internalize a terrible story. Something must be wrong with me, and so begins the lifelong search, not just for pleasure, but for soothing, validation, and belonging. Addiction, in this context, is not a disease. It's a response to emotional deprivation, to being unseen, unfelt, or chronically misunderstood. Many people reach adulthood still carrying the blueprint of that early void. They find themselves in relationships where they repeat the same abandonment, in careers that echo the same pressure to prove their worth, in cycles that numb the pain, but never address the source. And yet, here's the tragedy. Because the wound is invisible, the behavior gets judged. We blame the symptom instead of understanding the story. But your compulsion didn't appear out of nowhere. It came from somewhere deep, somewhere scared, somewhere needing relief. And until we're willing to trace that thread back, not to punish the past, but to understand it, we will stay stuck in cycles we never chose, but still repeat. Because every addiction, every compulsive act, began as an attempt to feel better in a world that made it hard to simply feel. How often have you called yourself weak? After the binge, after the argument, after the relapse. That crushing voice inside whispers, "What's wrong with me? Why can't I just stop?" But let's pause here. What if your compulsion is not a defect, but a message, a cry, not for discipline, but for understanding? Gabor Maté challenges the very foundation of how we view addiction. He doesn't ask, why the addiction? He asks, why the pain? Because beneath every compulsion is a person trying to soothe something unbearable, something unspeakable. Let's be clear, this doesn't mean there's no responsibility, but responsibility begins with honesty and the courage to look at ourselves with truth, not shame. Calling a behavior bad doesn't change it. Condemning ourselves only feeds the cycle. But when we begin to ask, what is this behavior protecting me from feeling? Something shifts. Maybe your overworking hides a fear of being unworthy. Maybe your overeating covers a well of loneliness. Maybe your people-pleasing masks the terror of being rejected. These patterns don't make you weak. They show you've been fighting a battle, often silently, often alone. Compulsion is not the opposite of willpower. It's the result of unmet needs screaming to be heard. So let's stop moralizing pain. Let's stop labeling people as broken. Instead, let's ask, what happened to you? What are you carrying? What are you still trying to survive? Because no one chooses suffering, but we all choose ways to survive it, and survival, even when messy, is never weakness. In the moment, it feels like salvation. The drink, the scroll, the sugar, the rush. A wave of calm washes over you, like finally being able to breathe after holding it in for too long, but then it fades, and the guilt creeps in, the shame, the emptiness, and the cycle begins again. Why? Because what soothes us in the short term often distances us from long-term healing. Our culture is addicted to speed, to instant gratification, to numbing, to fixing pain fast. But deep wounds don't heal on fast forward. They require what most of us were never taught: presence, slowness, and truth. Immediate relief isn't the enemy. It's just incomplete. It bypasses the part of you that's actually hurting. The child within who needed to be held, not silenced. The adult within who longs to feel safe enough to stop performing. Real healing begins when we stop asking, "How can I stop this behavior?" and start asking, "What is this behavior trying to protect me from?" It's not enough to remove the compulsion. We have to meet the pain that made it necessary, and that takes time. There's a reason quick fixes fail. They don't address the root. You can't uproot a tree by cutting off its leaves. You have to go underground, into the soil of your story, into the place where your pain began. Yes, that's hard, but it's also liberating. Because when we slow down and turn toward the wound instead of away, we discover something powerful. You're not broken. You're grieving. Grieving for connection, for love, for safety. And grief doesn't need to be fixed. It needs to be felt. Only then can healing begin, not as punishment, but as a return to wholeness. Your body remembers everything, even the things your mind has tried to forget. The tension in your shoulders, the tightness in your chest, the fatigue that no amount of sleep can cure. These aren't random. They're messages, whispers, sometimes screams, trying to get your attention. Gabor Maté often says, the body never lies. When we repress emotion, when we deny pain, when we silence our truth, that energy doesn't vanish. It settles in the body, waiting to be heard. Think about it. How often have you felt sick before a confrontation? Or exhausted after pretending to be okay all day? How often do your cravings come when you're anxious, lonely, or ashamed? This isn't coincidence. It's communication. The body speaks the language of emotion, through symptoms, signals, and sensations. It doesn't care about appearances or schedules. It cares about honesty. But we've been taught to mistrust the body, to override its signals, to numb its discomfort. We take pills to suppress. We push through pain. We call fatigue laziness, and in doing so, we miss the invitation to listen, to slow down, to feel. Your compulsion may be the body's way of saying, "I'm overwhelmed, I need care." But instead of listening, we judge. We attack ourselves. We say, "I have no self-control," when really what we have is unfelt pain stored in flesh and bone. Healing begins with reconnection. Put your hand on your heart. Breathe. Ask gently, "What are you trying to tell me?" The body doesn't need to be controlled. It needs to be trusted. Because beneath every symptom is a story. And every story deserves to be heard. Especially yours. If pain is the root of compulsion, shame is its fertilizer. Not the healthy kind of guilt that guides us when we've done harm, but the corrosive shame that whispers, "You are the harm. You're not enough. You'll never change." Shame doesn't shout. It seeps, quietly, into your habits, your relationships, your self-talk. It tells you that your worth is conditional, that if people really knew you, your cravings, your darkness, your failures, they'd walk away. And so you hide, you numb, you perform, you pretend. But here's the cruel twist. The more we feel ashamed, the more we crave escape. And the more we escape, the more ashamed we feel. It's a closed loop, a trap. And shame is the lock. Many of us learned shame early, not just through abuse, but through subtle cues. The disappointed look, the cold silence, the message that our feelings were too much, or our needs were selfish. We internalized those messages. made them part of our identity. And now, as adults, we carry a deep confusion. Am I trying to heal, or just become someone more acceptable? Real healing doesn't come from becoming better. It comes from remembering you were never unworthy to begin with. Shame melts not through effort, but through empathy. The moment someone says, "Me too," the moment you realize your story isn't strange, it's human. That's when the chains begin to loosen. So let this be your reminder. You don't have to be perfect to be worthy. You only have to be present. Because shame dies in the light of compassion, and you are allowed to bring your full self into the light. Healing doesn't happen in isolation. Wounds that were formed in relationship must be healed in relationship, beginning with the one you have with yourself. You may have spent a lifetime offering affection to others, being the reliable one, the giver, the peacekeeper. But how often have you turned that same tenderness inward? When you reach for your compulsion, whatever it may be, what you're often longing for is not the substance, the action, or the distraction. What you're longing for is presence, someone to sit with your pain, to say, "I see you, I'm here, I'm not going anywhere." In the absence of that, we substitute. We scroll to feel seen. We eat to feel held. We overwork to feel valuable. But what if you gave yourself the one thing your compulsion can never give you? True connection. It begins small, placing a hand over your heart when anxiety rises, sitting in silence for 5 minutes, just breathing, looking into the mirror and offering the softness you'd give to a hurting child, and it expands outward. Finding spaces, therapy, support groups, friendships, where truth is welcomed, not judged, where you can show up as you are, not as you're expected to be. Gabor Maté reminds us that healing is not about becoming someone else. It's about coming home to who you were before the world told you to hide. Presence is the bridge. Affection is the medicine. Because the opposite of compulsion isn't control, it's connection. You've survived. You've built a life. You've held it together, sometimes by threads, sometimes through sheer will. Your compulsions helped you manage, endure, function, and for that, they deserve a strange kind of respect because they got you here. But now, maybe for the first time, you're ready for something more than survival. You're ready for freedom. Not the illusion of freedom that comes from suppressing urges. Not the harsh discipline that demands perfection, but the real kind. The kind that comes when you understand your pattern and choose something different, one small act at a time. Freedom begins when you stop asking, "How do I fix myself?" and start asking, "How can I care for what hurts?" To transform a compulsion, you don't attack it. You outgrow it. You create a new inner environment, one where your nervous system no longer needs to escape, one where safety isn't a performance, but a practice. That might look like setting gentle, non-punitive boundaries with yourself, building daily rituals of grounding, breathwork, journaling, movement, naming your triggers and preparing responses with compassion, speaking your truth, even if your voice shakes, allowing space for imperfection, relapse, and return. And most of all, staying with yourself in discomfort, staying when the urge rises, staying when the inner critic screams. Because every time you stay, you rewrite the story from "I can't handle this" to "I can hold this, and I can hold myself." That is freedom, not the absence of pain, but the presence of self. You've spent years running, maybe decades, running from memories, from silence, from the aching spaces inside that no one ever taught you how to hold. But here's a truth that might change everything. You don't need to run anymore. Because what you're running from isn't a monster. It's a wound, and wounds don't need escape. They need care. There is a way back to yourself. Not the version of you that performs, not the one that pleases or pretends, but the real you, raw, imperfect, resilient. Coming back to yourself doesn't happen all at once. It happens in the small moments. When you pause before reaching for the distraction. When you feel an emotion rise and choose to breathe instead of numb. When you forgive yourself again and again for being human. You are not the sum of your compulsions. You are not the worst thing you've done on your hardest day. You are a story still unfolding, and in that story, there is room for softness, for healing, for return. Because the place you've been trying to get to, the peace, the wholeness, the home, it's not out there. It's in here. It always has been, and no matter how far you've strayed, there is always a way back.